As the college fall term begins, which statement rings truer? You can't afford not to go to college, or you can't afford to go to college.
Tuition has gone up about 200%, more than 200%. State-based financial aid is nowhere, so the only place that students have to turn is student loans.
Tonight on Arizona Week, Mastering Finance to Get to Academics.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Cheha.
The average debt an Arizona graduate faces upon earning a bachelor's degree is $21,000. If it's a master's or a doctorate, add another $45,000. Big tuition increases, lack of state financial aid, and the economy put college students to the test before they even walk into a classroom. We'll look at the situation with 4 interviews. First, Dan Sullivan of the Arizona Students Association, a lobbying outfit based in Phoenix. What's the big picture for college finances these days from the student point of view? Obviously, it's getting more expensive.
It's getting more expensive, and really students are being hit on all fronts. At the state level, federal level, over the summer we saw interest rates could have doubled. We've seen Pell Grants attacked. We've seen legislation this past session that targeted students that would have made them pay an extra $2,000 out of pocket towards tuition. So really students, they're coming from all sides. And really, the picture is tuition has gone up about 200%, more than 200%. State-based financial aid is nowhere. So the only place that students have to turn is student loans.
And those loans, as you mentioned, there was a threat that the interest rate was going to double. That didn't happen, at least for undergraduates, right?
That didn't happen for undergraduates, and a lot of it, our organization, here in Arizona and at the federal level, put a lot of our time and energy into it. We had students emailing congressmen, senators, letting them know exactly what was going to happen to them if it didn't pass. Senator Kyle is one of the major proponents of it, so luckily we had somebody in our Senate delegation who voted to keep the interest rates low.
So what are Pell Grants? Educate our viewers about what those are.
Pell Grants are a grant, I believe that they've been around since the 70s. The maximum is $5,500. It goes towards tuition. It used to be that it would cover most of a student's tuition. It's not the case anymore. Now it barely covers a fraction. Congress has looked into slashing the eligibility. So hopefully, if organizations like ours and the broader student movement has its say, they'll be around and they'll be enhanced.
And Pell Grants are need-based.
Need-based, that's correct.
The issues obviously affect low-income students more so than others. Is that right?
That's correct. A statistic I was just looking at from the Arizona Board of Regents shows that 40% of students showing need-based aid are not having that need met. They're turning to student loans. They can't turn to state-based financial aid because it simply is not robust enough for it. So students are really having to make the tough decision of, can I afford to go to school? Can I afford these books? And it's decisions that students shouldn't have to make.
What is available in the way of state aid here in Arizona for college students?
It's the Arizona Financial Aid Trust, and it only accounts for 1% of the total financial aid allocated to students. If you look comparatively at Washington, which has about the same population size as Arizona, the state of Washington allocates about $200 million a year. New Mexico, in our same region, does about $70 million. Arizona, $16 million. So 1%, the biggest number of financial aid that goes to students is in the form of loans, and it's about 47% of the total financial aid given to students.
Now, despite all of that and students having to borrow more, student debt level in Arizona is lower than the national average. In fact, it ranks in the bottom 5. Why is that?
Well, it's the national level is about 24,000. We're at 21, and those numbers are a little bit out of date because we've seen such steep tuition increases. I predict that we're going to see those numbers skyrocket, and Arizona is going to be in the top. We're just behind California in the amount of tuition increases that we saw. So students don't have anywhere else to turn but student loans. So those tuition increases are going to result in a higher student loan burden for Arizona students.
So $21,000 on average. How long does it take a student to pay that back?
It depends, really. Anywhere from 10 to 30 years. For example, my wife and I, we took out a combined of $50,000 to finance her education degree and my bachelor's degree. We're probably going to be paying that off for about 25 years or so. It's not unheard of for students to graduate with $40,000, $60,000, $100,000 in student debt. And the thing about it is, if you have that student debt, you're going to pay it off. It's nearly impossible to get rid of that student loan. If you file for bankruptcy, student loans are exempt from that. So if you have them, you're going to pay them off.
Now, you talked about the Arizona Students Association activity on the federal level, along with the federal organization, on the interest rate on Stafford loans, this basic student loan. What are you doing here in Arizona to enhance financing for college education?
What we're doing is we're involved in the biggest student voter registration, voter education, and get out the vote effort that we've ever seen. Really what we're going to do with that is get students out to the polls to vote for Prop 204, the Quality Education and Jobs Act, because that's really the solution to a lot of the problems that students are seeing. The Quality Education and Jobs Act brings about $150 million a year. Will bring about $150 million a year to state-based financial aid for students. So we're going to get them registered, educated about the candidates, and we're going to get them out to the polls to get politicians to prioritize student issues, and we're going to get them out to pass the Quality Education and Jobs Initiative.
If it does pass, what does that make available for college-level education in Arizona?
It's going to provide millions of dollars for the university system. The system's seen nothing but cuts in the past year, so it's going to bring about $300 million to school. Half of that, about $150 million, is going to go directly to scholarships for university and community college students.
And tuition at universities, as you pointed out, is way up here in Arizona and across the nation for that matter. What kind of an impact does that have on a student's education?
We've not just seen tuition going up. You see professors being laid off. You see class sizes going off. You see advisors being cut. So students are footing the bill. The state's not footing the bill for education, and that means that the typical services that a student would get is just not there anymore. And we talk about tuition going up, but we also don't talk about the total cost of attendance. So students are still having to reach deep for books, housing, food, all that kind of stuff.
State universities provided nearly $400 million in scholarships and grants to their students in 2010 and 11, a 74% increase in 4 years. Joining me to talk about how financial aid works at the institutional level is John Namitz, Director of Scholarships and Financial Aid at the University of Arizona. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Is the financial aid picture at the U of A the same as it is statewide? Significant financial aid for students coming from the university?
Well, there are significant variances within the state universities as to programs and students even to some extent. But I think the opportunity likelihood is pretty similar across the state. We all like to think that nobody is not able to attend because of money.
And at the U of A, you were telling me about $170 million goes into scholarships, grants, and other programs to aid students, correct?
Yeah, it's about $170 million annually, and that does not count the student payroll, which is another $78 million.
Those are
annually.
Students working on campus?
Working on campus, you bet.
Do we assume that there's been a great increase in this here at the U of A over the last few years as tuition has gone up, as is the trend statewide?
I think that employment has been one of the many strategies students have used to help finance and build resumes. We're seeing the Pima County business community value our students at a higher rate as the best source of labor in the state, really, because they're honest, reliable, they're already vetted as to character and motivation because they're at a Tier 1 Research 1 university.
Now, how's the change in financial aid mix been going in the last few years with the rough economy and tuition increases? Different opportunities for students to support their educations?
It's an interesting question because we've held pretty constant the merit-only kinds of aid we've done, but we've been able to increase other kinds of aid, outside scholarships, employment opportunities for students, and we're bringing in far more money from the federal programs, almost doubled the Pell Grant in the last 3 years in terms of numbers of students and dollars.
The Pell Grant being the federal grants that are need-based, correct?
Yeah, for undergraduate students.
How many students on campus are being affected by changes in the federal loan programs? Do you know?
That's hard to estimate right now. I'm going to go on record as saying I think there may be 3,500 students impacted, and these would be graduate and professional students impacted by the loss of the interest subsidy in the first $8,500 in loan that they might borrow in a year, about 3,500 students.
And that's out of a total enrollment on campus of around 39,000.
Yeah.
What kinds of issues are you and your staff members seeing from students and parents who are looking for financial aid to support their educations?
We have more interest in scholarship searches, and part of that is we have really promoted our Scholarship Universe search engine as a methodology of organizing student and family activity in regard to scholarships. Our goal here is to help students and families help finance and to incent students to bring money to this campus.
Now, over the last decade, there have been significant tuition increases at all the universities in Arizona. This year, this academic year, no tuition increase. Big sigh of relief over that?
You know, there's got to be everywhere, I would think, except in the budget office, perhaps. And for my staff, it becomes a very, very considerable problem to sort of make sure that we spread the money very, very carefully and, of course, fairly and equally. So the more ground that students might lose in terms of net cost, after grants and scholarships and even work on campus, the more ground students lose on that, and we think they're really not that much, it really becomes a challenge for people in my business.
Now, students are leaving school with their degrees, but also with a great deal of debt. We understand the average statewide in Arizona is about $21,000 per student. What is it here at the U of A? Is it about the same?
It's about the same. We're just a hair lower than the state average. It's around low 21. And I would not characterize that as heavy or extreme. We're well under the national average. I think probably because of our focus on investing in our students with the employment programs and even with our merit and need-based programs.
And we understand that when it comes to payoff of student loans, U of A graduates and graduates of all universities in Arizona have a lower default rate than nationally. Is that so?
Oh, absolutely, and that's been obtaining for many years. It's the federal default rate is a complicated formula, and it's less than 4% for our students, but as a bank would calculate it, it's less than 2%. And even that 2% tends to get repaid. It's just that for a time they might be in arrears.
John Nametz, Director of the Office of Scholarships and Financial Aid for the University of Arizona. Thanks for speaking with me.
Been my pleasure.
Have a great semester.
You too.
Now for the student perspective, we'll speak with two students. First, Ryan Stotts, President of Arizona State University's Graduate Student and Professional Association. The federal student loan program is different for graduate students. How so?
Well, graduate students are not, most graduate students are not eligible for Pell Grants. Only a very small percentage of students who are pursuing a master's in education, so it's like less than 1% of recipients of the Pell Grant in Arizona. So the only type of aid that's available to all graduate students is through loans. So there's 3 different types of loans that are available to graduate students: Stafford loans, Graduate Plus loans, and Perkins loans.
But those loans are administered differently for graduate students than they are for undergraduates, correct?
That is correct. And particularly the biggest one is the Stafford Loans program, which this summer particularly changed for graduate students in that the in-school interest subsidy was lost. And so graduate students have always paid a higher interest rate on the Stafford loans. Well, not always, but for the past few years have paid a higher interest rate. And so in addition to paying a higher interest rate on those, we've also lost the in-school subsidy on those.
And what's the implication of that financially for students? Hardship for sure, but do you have any specifics about how it's affecting people?
Yeah, I know the figures I've heard is about $18 billion extra in student loans over the next decade in terms of what graduate students will be incurring. And I've also heard from a number of our constituents who were really concerned and wanted us to get involved prior to the decision. And we did a lot of campaigning and contacting legislators, trying to get them to reconsider this change because a lot of students who take out the Stafford loans are seeing it as an extra burden and trying to perhaps even take out more loans just to be able to cover the interest that they would have to start accumulating right then and paying.
Now, you're working on your PhD in anthropology, specifically archaeology, and you told me you're not using student loans for that. Is that correct?
Right. I'm incredibly lucky in that I have a research assistantship through ASU that has a tuition waiver and also a stipend that comes with it. And so that combined with my husband's income, I don't have to take out student loans.
But you have friends and peers who are very involved in having to finance their educations through loans. Do you have any examples of how that's going for them?
Yeah, I think a lot of, particularly our master's level students at ASU, are financing their education through loans. And so we see a lot of students come in and talk to us about that. And you know, a lot of graduate students take out loans not to necessarily pay their tuition, but also to have to pay living expenses. So we're seeing a lot of students who are having to take out loans for those expenses as well, and that's creating an extra burden.
Is there a reason that graduate financing is treated differently than undergraduate financing when it comes to loans and grants?
I think the mindset is that undergraduate education is more something that a larger population will pursue, and this is more responsible for the government to support as compared to graduate education. I think in this day and age when so many professions require graduate education, we really need to be thinking about new, innovative ways to support those students.
And what might some of those ways be?
Improving graduate student aid at the institutional level and at a national level would really help it. I know that graduate students, high-level graduate students are also eligible to run for competitive grant programs through programs like the National Science Foundation, Jacob Javits, and those programs are also losing money, being consolidated, so less graduate students are able to apply for those programs and get access to that type of fellowship money. Also at an institutional level, thinking about ways to provide more graduate assistantships, so more RAs and TAs. Also with NSF losing money, it's harder for academic programs, for professors to get research grants, which provide the research assistantship dollars. NSF funding is also a really big issue for us.
NSF is the National Science Foundation?
The National Science Foundation. And other organizations, I know ASU gets a lot of money. We have a very good program where we get in astronomy and programs like that. So they go through NASA or the National Centers for Disease Control, all these national programs that have that give out research grants for different types of things. Those help provide funding for graduate students. And so when all of those programs are cut as well, you also see reductions in graduate student aid.
What needs to be done structurally within Arizona, perhaps in state government or in higher education levels on a system-wide basis, to improve the financial picture for graduate students?
We've actually signed on as supporters of the Quality Education and Jobs Act, which is Proposition 204. And we believe that with the passage of that, which would keep the 1% sales tax that was passed through Prop 100 back a couple of years ago. We have been partners in that process, and one of the things that will provide is a steady source of financial aid for the university systems. How that exactly will be distributed is more up to the Arizona Board of Regents and to the universities, but we've already been engaging in conversations with all of those entities to ensure that if that passes, graduate student financial aid will be considered in that process.
Now, U of A Student Body President Katie Murray is here with me. She's a senior majoring in marketing in the Eller College of Management. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us about your own student financial situation. How are you paying for college?
Well, I am actually very fortunate because I am a Hispanic National Merit Scholar, and so I've been fortunate enough to have my tuition paid for the last 3 going into my 4th year. And so thankfully I haven't had to take out any loans or anything.
So you won't have debt when you get out of school?
Personally, I will not.
That's unusual for a college student these days, right?
It's very unusual.
Now, where is your student administration as the president of the student body in terms of prioritizing student finance?
Student finance is always a key, no matter what the year is. And in a year like this, I would say it's even more crucial than normal. Last year, we were fortunate enough to have the first freeze in tuition in the last 20 years. And so it's things like that that we keep working for, not necessarily a freeze every year, but just steps in the right direction.
Now, how does that show up in connection with your work in representing the 38,000 students on campus? Are you lobbying? Are you talking to administrators, finance officials? How does that work?
Well, we're very fortunate to have great relationships with our administration, and I've met with Dr. Hart as well as several other administrators. I meet with several of the regents. I've spoken to the chairman of the board, and we are constantly working closely with them as well as the legislature to really ensure that the student voice is at the forefront of these conversations.
And what do you hear from fellow students about this issue? How important is it for them?
I think that this is really a key issue because so many students have come to me just saying how much they love this school. They're passionate about their major or program. They're passionate about their goals and their ambitions or an organization they're involved in, and they love being a Wildcat or even just an Arizona student. And so to hear students have to question their ability to potentially be a student next year or not be a student is something that I think is a huge issue for students. And so they definitely have voiced their opinion to me. And in a state where we're 50th in state-based financial aid, I look at it as we can only go forward and up from here.
So what do you think can be done about that ranking of 50th? Is there something that you and your administration will do to encourage legislators to provide more financial aid for college students?
Definitely. In addition to working closely on campus and with the Board of Regents, we have a lobby day every year where we bring hundreds of students to actually go speak to legislators at the Capitol. And in addition, we're working on the Quality Education and Jobs Act to try to get that passed with the Arizona Students Association this fall in the elections, because that will bring millions of financial aid and scholarship money for community college and university students.
What specifically is going on here on the U of A campus to support the passage of that initiative?
Specifically on campus, we are doing education, raising awareness, and then really one of my big goals is just pushing the election this fall in general. So we'll be trying to get students to vote, get students engaged, and part of that engagement will be reminding them how they can help themselves by voting for this proposition.
You mentioned a minute or two ago that there had been no tuition increase this year, and it was the first time in 20 years. What did you hear from students in reaction to that when that announcement was made?
That was huge to students. They've never seen anything like this, obviously, most of them since they've been born. And so having victories like that, having victories where interest rates on student loans didn't double in July, that was great. So these things are really getting students excited, really getting students happy to know that people are looking out for their interests.
Now, looking ahead to what might happen with tuition in the next year or coming years, you told me you had a conversation with Dr. Ann Weaver Hart, the new president of the university. What's her position on that? What do you expect to be the engagement there as far as she is concerned with tuition increases?
Well, we haven't had specific talks about tuition yet, but I am very positive and very excited to say that she is really excited to work directly with students. She wants our feedback. She wants our input. And so I think it's going to be a great opportunity to work with her this year.
And what other means will you use to address the issue of tuition increases? Obviously, the lobbying efforts and talking with legislators that you talked about, but what else can happen that can enhance your position?
I think, honestly, the best thing for me is really relationships. So whether it be relationships with the students to really find out what do they want in terms of financial aid, in terms of scholarship programs, working with administration to see what can we do to directly impacting them, and then even just working with the Board of Regents and the legislators on a statewide level to say, looking at these issues throughout our community, what can we do on a greater level to help these students?
We have about a minute remaining. In that time, tell me, what kind of credibility do you see student government having in the eyes of the decision makers and the policy makers, the legislators, Board of Regents members? Do you work on that constantly?
Yes, definitely. I am a huge believer in that the student voice can be monumental to our success in accomplishing things, because the students are the reason that we're all here, and we are the ones that are going through these struggles or these victories every single day. And so it's really my job to make sure that our voice is amplified to its fullest. And I think when we do that, then you're really reaching the people and the decision makers that have the ability to help us fix this situation and really improve it.
Katie Murray, president of the student body at the University of Arizona, thanks for being with me, and have a great senior year.
Thank you so much.
More on college student financing and links to information on loan programs is available on our website, azpm.org. That's our program for Friday, August 10th, 2012. To find out what we're working on for next week, read the AZ Week Notebook blog at azweek.com. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.